day not too long ago, my daughter Addie came home from school all excited because in science class at school they were learning about butterflies. And she was so excited to tell me about what happened when they changed from a caterpillar into a butterfly, but she couldn't get the word metamorphosis out. So she kept trying, she kept stumbling around with the word for a while, she couldn't get it right, she finally just said, they changed. When we think about something being transformed, we're going through a metamorphosis. Butterflies are probably one of the first things we think about, because they go through such a radical change, become a totally different kind of creature. Maybe you've been blessed enough to be able to see this happen in person. Isn't that amazing, the kind of drastic change that happens? The idea of a transformation or a metamorphosis is something that changes completely. When you look at that caterpillar, you never would think that that ugly little worm would one day be one of the most beautiful and delicate creatures that God has ever created. You would never think that it's the kind of creature that would end up in children's coloring books or on a little girl's bedroom walls and clothing. In fact, my daughter Addie today is wearing a butterfly skirt and a butterfly shirt today. It had nothing to do with the sermon. I just said, hey, guess what I'm preaching about today? Before we would ever call that caterpillar a beautiful thing, it has to undergo a metamorphosis, a transformation that makes it turn into that completely new creature. That new butterfly is unrecognizable as the caterpillar that it once was. It is no longer the plump, crawling worm that it was, but the delicate, light creature that can take to the sky. As disciples of Jesus, we ought to be going through a transformation as well. We should be changing and growing as we get to know Jesus better and better and get closer to Him. If we aren't growing and changing as we get closer to Jesus, then something is wrong. If we can be a Christian for years and even in some cases decades and never change, then there's something missing. It goes back to that idea that we can possibly be a Christian and not also be a disciple of Jesus. Dallas Willard wrote an entire book called The Great Omission that is about this very idea. He says, for at least the last several decades, the churches of the Western world have not made discipleship a condition of being a Christian. One is not required to be or to intend to be a disciple in order to become a Christian. And one may remain a Christian without any signs of progress toward or in discipleship. Churches are filled with undiscipled disciples, as Jeff Moody has called them. Of course, in reality, there is no such thing. Most problems in contemporary churches can be explained by the fact that the members have never decided to follow Christ. Let that sink in for a second. Not having made our converts disciples, it is impossible for us to teach them to live as Jesus lived and taught. The bottom line is that if we stay the same, if we never grow or change, then we aren't acting as disciples of Jesus. If we aren't living as Jesus lived and taught, then we aren't acting as disciples of Him. And if we ourselves are not acting as disciples of Jesus, how are we ever going to make other disciples of His, as He commanded us to do? In Romans chapter 12, verse 2, Paul says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Paul contrasts two ideas here that are important for us to understand to get at what he's saying here. The first is to be conformed to this world. Paul uses the word systematizo here, which means to form according to a pattern or to a mold. When my sister and I were growing up, we almost always got Christmas presents that were kind of along the same lines or a similar value or a similar nature, that kind of thing. Probably a lot of you parents or grandparents do the same thing with your kids and grandkids. So one year my sister got an easy bake oven, and I essentially got the same thing, but it was for making little rubber bugs instead of cupcakes and brownies. So you would mix up your goo, you would pour it into the mold of a spider or an ant or a scorpion or some other creepy crawly thing, and then you would bake it for a while. It would come out as this little rubbery bug formed exactly to the mold that you put it into. Now, I'm pretty sure I tortured my family with those things all the time. So parents, take note. Don't buy your kids a present that they can use to make you miserable with later on. That's not a good idea. That's the idea, though, behind the word that Paul uses here. If we are conformed to the world, we end up looking exactly like the mold of the people that the world produces. We conform to their patterns of behavior, their speech, their way of life. We have the same habits. We have the same goals in life. We are guided by the same things as the people of the world. That's not what a disciple of Jesus is supposed to look like. Paul uses the word Allah here, which if you've been in Sunday school with Rod before, you know he calls this the big but. This is the word that Paul used when he wanted to make sure there was a distinction, a clear distinction between two things. He wanted there to be no doubt about what he was saying here. He tells us not to be conformed to the pattern of this world, but instead to be transformed by the renewal of our minds. The Greek word for transformed here will be familiar to you. It's the word metamorpho. It's where we get our word for metamorphosis, just like the butterflies. So this word means to change in a manner that is visible to others, or to change inwardly in your fundamental character. See, Paul urges us not to be like the world that we live in, but to be fundamentally, inwardly changed in a way that is visible to others. In a world full of caterpillars, we should be butterflies. There should be no doubt that we are followers of Jesus simply because of the way that we live and because of our inward character. Instead of conforming to the world, we should be changing and growing in order to look more and more like Jesus in a world that looks nothing like him. Paul talks about this in 2 Corinthians and Colossians as well. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, he says, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away, and behold, the new has come." When we are in Christ, he makes us into new creations. Not just people who have a few habits, not just people who go to church on Sundays now all of a sudden, but completely new people. In Romans chapter 6, Paul talks about how in baptism we die to our old self. We are buried with Christ, and we rise again out of the water to new life with him. That's what Paul is talking about here. We die to our old selves, and Jesus makes us new creations. You can think of baptism as the chrysalis that we emerge from, brand new creatures, brand new butterflies. We begin changing in ways that the world can see. That's the idea that Paul's getting at here. Colossians chapter 3, Paul says, "Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices, and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator." That sounds a lot like what he said in Romans chapter 12. Our new self is being renewed in knowledge after the image of our creator. As we get to know Jesus more and more, the old practices, the old ways of life, the old ways that we used to conform to the patterns of the world, they begin to be renewed and refreshed and transformed. As we get closer to Jesus, we begin to look more and more like him, not only outwardly in what people can see, but also in our inward character. For the rest of our time today, I'd like to take a look at 5 areas of our lives where we ought to be changing and growing and being transformed and renewed as we follow after Jesus. These 5 areas of our lives will give us a benchmark of whether or not we are growing as disciples of Jesus. Now, these aren't things you will necessarily notice day to day. Think of it like watching your kids grow up. Day to day, you don't really notice many of those changes. You might notice that a pair of pants looks like high waters now when they used to fit pretty well. I realized Gabe was starting to grow when he went into the living room one day, and we had this basket that we had up on a shelf that was full of the stuff that he shouldn't have, like nail clippers, pens, and phone chargers, stuff like that. And we thought it was up high enough for him not to get to. I walk into the living room, and he's got it spread out on the floor in front of him. He's playing with all those things that he's not supposed to have. So needless to say, that basket went much higher home after that. But we don't notice those changes day to day. But people who haven't seen your kids in a while, or your grandkids in a while, if you haven't seen them in a while, when you see them, then the first thing you notice is how much they've grown. That contrast from day to day isn't that much because there's only a little bit of growth each day. But the contrast over months or over years is drastic. So the same is true of our growth as disciples. Day to day, you won't notice a whole lot of change. Don't be discouraged by that. Instead of measuring your growth day to day, compare yourself now to where you were a year ago, or 3 years ago, or 5 years ago, or even further than that. Remember, discipleship is a lifelong process. It doesn't happen overnight. So the first of those 5 areas in our lives that I want to talk about today is how we act. Being a disciple of Jesus should change how we act and how we behave. Now, obviously, we are still going to fail in the way that we act. Even if you have been forgiven by Jesus, you still aren't perfect. Hope that's not news today. You will still act in sinful ways. In fact, that is true of all 5 of these areas. We are actively seeking to follow more closely after Jesus. If we're doing that, then the sin in our lives and the things that we struggle with should get progressively better and better. And again, that's not an overnight process. One of the biggest indicators of how we act is how we treat other people. Are we treating other people with love? Are we treating them as fellow creatures made in the image and the likeness of God? Or are other people an annoyance, or an inconvenience, or an interruption, or a means to get what you want? We have all been treated well by people. We've all been treated poorly by people. Which person do you want to be around? Which person would you listen to if they were trying to tell you about what they believe about Jesus? Our gauge for how we act and how we behave is whether or not we are following God's laws. And we talked a little bit about this last week. Following all the rules is not enough to save us. It's not what Christianity is all about. But for too many Christians, too many people, Christianity is all about behavior modification. It's about learning to behave in the proper way, learning to sit in class quietly, learning to do all the right things at all the right times. Now that is not the point of what we do here. Behavior modification is not the goal, but changing our behavior is still important. When our behavior is transformed by knowing Jesus, then something significant has happened in the life of the disciple. In John chapter 13, Jesus said, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, so also you are to love one another. By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The way that we show love for one another is through how we act and how we behave, and how we treat other people. And that kind of love is supposed to be evident to all who see us if we are disciples of Jesus. Being a disciple of Jesus should transform the way that we behave until that kind of love is the most prominent characteristic of our lives. Being a disciple of Jesus should also change how we speak. Oftentimes there is nothing more difficult than to try to control what comes out of our mouths and when. One of the best ways to gauge our speech as disciples of Jesus is to ask ourselves, do the words that I say honor and glorify God? Now that includes the words that we speak to others, and it includes the words that we speak when we're alone. Bill Hybels wrote a book called Character, Who You Are When No One's Watching. That's a pretty good definition of character. It applies to all areas of our character, but it also applies to our speech. Now you may have complete control over the things you say when people are around you, but do the things that come out of your mouth when no one is around still honor and glorify God? Would you still say those things if you weren't alone? Maybe you struggle with talking about people in a way that isn't very honoring to God. Have you ever known someone who couldn't be nicer to someone's face, but as soon as they left, they started talking about it? Sometimes speaking in a way that is not honoring to God while someone is around is not a problem, but as soon as they leave, you start to struggle with speaking in God-honoring ways about that person. So how we talk about someone is just as important as what we say to them. The kind of jokes that we tell, or the things that we laugh at, play into this as well. It's often hard not to get roped into coarse joking and off-color jokes when others around you are telling them, whether it's in your workplace, or in your family, or somewhere else. What do you do? In that moment, you have a choice to either go along with it, laugh at the jokes that are being told, maybe even tell a few of your own, or you can follow the standard of Jesus instead. Paul says in Ephesians 5:4, he says, "Let there be no filthiness or foolish talk or crude joking, which are out of place, but instead let there be thanksgiving." Sometimes it's really hard to do that when people around you are being lewd, crude, sexist, or racist. Some of the most difficult times to control your tongue are when we are frustrated, or angry, or offended. What comes out of our mouths when we are feeling slighted or upset can really reveal what's going on in our minds and in our hearts. When we suddenly lose our filter because we're upset about something, does what comes out of our mouths still honor and glorify God? That goes right down to what we say when we stub our toe, or when somebody cusses off in traffic. I saw somebody online once say that their kids asked them how they knew that every single other driver on the road was an idiot. So what we say when we're upset not only affects our witness to non-believers, but it also affects our kids and our grandkids. Say something that you don't want your kids to learn or don't want your kids to repeat, and I can nearly guarantee you that's what they're going to say. And they're going to laugh about it, and they're going to taunt you with it, and then they're going to tell everybody else, I heard mom, dad say this. Sometimes we struggle with what we say when we're confronted with people or ideas that we don't agree with. Our culture has become a war zone for people who just simply don't agree with one another. Whether the disagreement is about politics or the economy or healthcare or abortion or immigration, you name it. Somewhere along the line, we have lost the ability to disagree without being disagreeable. Now, whenever someone disagrees, they're automatically the enemy. And hateful and cruel things are said on both sides of every argument by believers and non-believers alike. That simply doesn't line up with what ought to be happening in our lives as we're disciples of Jesus. These days, our speech extends beyond just our tongues. Our fingers can spout some pretty nasty things through a keyboard. And it is increasingly easier to hide behind a keyboard and a cell phone and say all kinds of cruel and ungodly things through a text message, an email, on Facebook, on Twitter, or whatever other social media service I'm thinking about. It's a lot easier to forget to be Christ-like in our speech when we're not in front of the person that we're talking to, but we're behind a screen instead. Our speech online is just as important as our speech face-to-face. James has a lot to say about the damage that our tongues can do. James chapter 3, he says, "For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. If we put bits into the mouth of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also, though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird and reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not be so. We're going to let Jesus be Lord of our lives. He has to be Lord of our speech as well. We have to let Jesus and his love transform the way that we speak and the way that we write until every word that comes out of our mouths or out of our fingers through a keyboard is honoring and glorifying God. We're trying to show the love of Jesus to the world, and we have to start by showing that love through what we say and what we write. This goes deeper than just our speech, though, this transformation that ought to be happening. Being a disciple of Jesus should change the way that we think as well. We shouldn't have to worry too much about our speech, because following Jesus means that we should be changing our minds and the way that we think. Jesus reminds us in Matthew chapter 12, "For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." In other words, our mouths say only what is already in our hearts. Our focus needs to be on changing the source of what we say, letting Jesus change the way that we think. In Romans chapter 12, Paul told us to be transformed by the renewal of our minds. It starts with what we think and what we believe. This renewal and transformation that has to happen in our minds is not a one-time thing. When Paul tells us to be transformed, he uses a present passive verb, which means it's an ongoing action that is happening to us, an ongoing thing that Jesus is doing in our lives. Again, this is a lifelong process of discipleship. We are continually allowing Jesus to transform how we think and what goes through our minds. And we do that by doing what Paul told the Corinthians to do in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. It says, "Take every thought captive to obey Christ." What runs through our heads might be completely different than what comes out of our mouths. When you have moments where you are fully in control of your tongue, are you also fully in control of your thoughts about that other driver who cut you off in traffic? Or about your spouse when they make you angry? Or about that coworker that frustrates you? Thoughts that don't honor God can come in a lot of different forms. They can be anger, hatred, lust, fantasy, or even daydreams. When those thoughts come along and we are tempted to dwell on them, we have to take them captive to obedience to Jesus. Having those thoughts is not a sinful thing. Those are temptations. It's when we allow our minds to dwell on those things and let them settle in our minds that they become sinful. When we entertain evil thoughts and ideas, then we are moving in the wrong direction. The battle to be growing disciples of Jesus starts in our minds. Being a disciple of Jesus should also change the way that we live in more ways than just how we act and think and speak. Being a disciple of Jesus should also change what our lives are all about. When we decide to follow after Jesus, it gives us a whole new meaning and purpose to our lives that we simply don't have without it. You hear people all the time talking about searching for the meaning of life. People all around our country and around our world struggle to feel like it's even worth living because they don't have any purpose to their lives. People without a relationship with Jesus find all kinds of reasons of things to live for. Following your dreams, realizing your potential, seeking wisdom and knowledge, all the way down to eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Ultimately, any meaning and purpose for our lives outside of Jesus is empty, because without Him, none of those things have an eternal significance. Living our lives for Jesus means that we know we are made in the image of God. We know we are deeply loved by Him, and that we have a mission given to us by Jesus Himself to make disciples of all people. When we follow Jesus, our purpose in life is no longer about us and about our pleasure in life, or about achieving the American dream, or he who dies with the most toys wins. All those things fade when this life ends. They have no eternal significance at all. When we become disciples of Jesus, we have a much greater purpose to our lives, something that gives us a reason to keep on going, a reason to keep living for Jesus. Our mission is to help as many people as we can get to know Jesus so that they too can enjoy eternal life with Jesus. When we are disciples of Jesus, it transforms our very purpose of our lives until it is more in line with the heart of Jesus on the ground. Ultimately, being a disciple of Jesus should change our hearts as well. This kind of change is not just about behavior modification. You can do a pretty decent job of changing the rest of those attributes, given enough effort and enough willpower. We can force ourselves to act differently, to speak differently, sometimes even to think differently, or to live for a different purpose in our lives, but we can't change our hearts on our own. Being a disciple of Jesus means that our hearts are changed by getting closer to Jesus. It means letting the Holy Spirit do His work in our lives. This is not something that we can do on our own. We can't change our own hearts. We can only get as close as we can to the one who can change our hearts. When our hearts change, it fundamentally changes who we are and what we're all about. Day by day, year by year, as we grow in our relationship with Jesus, our hearts begin to come more and more to resemble His. Being a disciple of Jesus means that we have to let Him change our lives. We have to let Him transform us into the men and women that He created us to be. It means that we let Him change how we think, and how we act, how we speak, how we live, and even change our very hearts. Being a disciple of Jesus should change you in a visible, undeniable way that everyone around you can see it as well. Just as a butterfly emerges from a chrysalis as a totally new creature, so we should slowly become totally new creatures ourselves. A totally new creation that is falling more in line with God's standards every day. And when we do that, we will have an impact on the world around us. They will notice the difference in us. They will see the changes in our lives, and they will see that we don't react the same way to the things that we used to. They will see that we treat others with love. That's what we're meant to be. We're meant to be different from the world around us. We're meant to be people who display what it means to follow Jesus in the midst of a world that wants nothing to do with Him. We were meant to be butterflies